Hello and welcome back to the Sid'em Stardom podcast. I am your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter where I post as at BChat50. And the Sid'em section starts off with a couple of guys that were drafted fairly high, or at least high relative to peers at their position, starting with Matt Ryan against Carolina at Carolina. I mean, when you drafted him, you were drafting him as a QB1, a guy that you could rely on week in and week out. And while he's averaging 290.1 yards passing per game, which is very good, he has just 17 touchdown passes this year. It's been a down year for Matt Ryan. He's been inconsistent. Others have stepped up at the position, making him really not even a QB1 at this point, really a QB2 who you have to use just on matchup basis, and this is not the matchup basis to use him. He's got the Panthers this week, who are ranked by Football Outsiders as the second best pass defense in the league. They're allowing just 227.2 yards passing per game, and they've surrendered just 16 touchdowns. So really tough passing defense. And at this point, I'd go as far as to say that you can cut Matt Ryan if you have another need, or if you have a good decent quarterback on your roster. You're probably better off using streaming options than Ryan over the next few weeks. So go ahead and cut ties with Matt Ryan. Forget not starting him. Cut bait with him. Next up at running back, we got DeMarco Murray against the Bills at home. And he's just been dreadful this year. Has not looked like the back that led the league in rushing last year. And it's more than just taking him out from behind that gargantuan, awesome Dallas Cowboys offensive line. He just hasn't looked like a fit in the Philadelphia Eagles offense. Over the last 2 weeks, he's totaled just 54 yards from scrimmage, and that's all on the ground. He's been a non-factor in the passing game. And he played just 14 offensive snaps last week, and he's played only 79 offensive snaps over his last 3 games combined, so not even on the field a lot. He reportedly complained to the Eagles owner about his playing time after last week's surprise win against the New England Patriots, so maybe the squeaky wheel gets the grease and he gets extra playing time this week, but do you really want to rely on that in your fantasy playoffs? I certainly don't. Ryan Matthews should be back this week to further cloud that backfield situation, and to be quite blunt, Ryan Matthews has looked like a considerably, probably 2 times the back that DeMarco Murray has in Chip Kelly's offense. He's a much better fit. I wouldn't be surprised to see Matthews actually lead the backfield in offensive snaps this week, as long as he remains on track to play. And Murray just glued to the pine and sulking. But not a guy that I would be starting against a Bills defense that's allowing just over 100 yards rushing per game, and has only surrendered 8 rushing touchdowns. So bad matchup for Murray, not playing well, not playing much. So pretty easy for me to suggest sitting him, even though he was drafted like an RB1. And I mean, at this point, there aren't many healthy running backs from round 1 and round 2. And yet Murray isn't even worth starting. I mean, add him to that list of busts early in the draft with Eddie Lacy, Jeremy Hill, and C.J. Anderson. And at least in the case of Hill and Anderson, they've shown signs of life of late. DeMarco Murray, not so much. He's going the opposite direction. Next up at wide receiver, we got Michael Crabtree against the Broncos. And I feel like last time the Raiders and Broncos played, Michael Crabtree was unfortunately found himself listed in the sit-em section. And I mean, if you sat him in that contest, you can't be too upset. He totaled just 4 receptions for 54 yards on 9 targets with 0 touchdowns in that game. I'd say that's a little bit closer to the ceiling than the floor for Crabtree this week. The Broncos' pass defense has been lights out, allowing just 195.6 passing yards per game. No other team is allowing fewer than 200 yards passing per game. In fact, the next closest team is allowing about 15 more yards per game passing at around 210 yards passing per game. Not giving up any touchdowns either, just 11. And a lot of Crabtree's value this year, not all of it certainly, has been tied to his ability to find the end zone with 7 touchdown grabs. 63.3 yards receiving per game and 5.5 receptions per game are certainly nothing to sneeze at, but the touchdowns have really helped his value. And Broncos just not giving up many touchdowns to receivers or to anyone this year. And Crabtree able to save some lines the last couple of weeks by reaching the end zone, but hasn't surpassed 60 yards receiving in 4 straight games. I don't look for this game to be the one where he turns it around. While he just got extended, he earned that extension. He's played well this year. Not a good matchup for him. Keep him glued to your benches. The final guy that I'm going to advocate benching is nice free agent darling last week and a plug-and-play tight end in Scott Chandler. I delivered on that buzz. caught 4 of his 7 targets for 61 yards receiving and found the end zone. Sledding is a little bit tough, or is very tough this week against the Houston Texans. And Gronk is practicing now. Obviously, if Gronk plays, Chandler's a no-brainer sit anyway. But if Gronk does not play, I'm still advocating sitting Chandler. Don't like the matchup. The Texans have allowed just 4 touchdown receptions to tight ends this year. And they're not allowing a ton of fantasy points to tight ends, 11th fewest in fantasy this season. So really a tough matchup for tight ends. And Chandler's very touchdown dependent as a big guy. Even last week with the depleted passing or receiving corps for Tom Brady, he still only targeted him 7 times, which isn't obviously a terrible number, but there was an expectation that target bump would be around double-digit targets and fell short of that. So not a big Chandler fan this week. Tight end is pretty barren, but I think there are about 12 guys that I'd rank ahead of Scott Chandler, which puts him outside the tight end 1 spectrum in standard leagues, unless, of course, one roster hoards all of the tight ends. But that notwithstanding, I'm not using Chandler this week. Moving on to the stardom side of things, Blake Bortles is coming off of a huge game, and he's at this point a true QB1. I mean, he's putting up big numbers this year from a fantasy perspective, 27 passing touchdowns, 272.8 yards passing per game, and he's adding over 20 yards rushing per game. So you're getting 2 points from his legs on a weekly basis. And he's been excellent. He's gone for over 320 yards passing in back-to-back games, threw for 5 touchdowns last game, threw for a few more touchdowns the game before, has multiple touchdown passes in numerous games this year, and a 9 of 12 to be exact. So he's playing really good football, at least from a fantasy perspective. And a lot of that has to do with volume. Jacksonville's airing the football out a ton, attempting 39.25 passes per game. So really getting to air it out. And he has a really good matchup this week with the Colts. Colts are surrendering 280.4 yards passing per game, and they've given up 24 touchdown passes. So they've allowed the 3rd most passing yards per game and the 5th most touchdown passes for the season. So Colts not really stopping anyone in the passing attack. Bortles should pick that apart with red-hot A-Rob and the returning Allen Robs, not to mention tight end Julius Thomas occasionally showing up this year. At running back, I'm going to advocate starting Spencer Ware, and I don't think he's even the best back in his own backfield. I think Charcandrick West is actually a slightly better start, but I'd say both are startable. Obviously, if I'm advocating Ware, that means if I think his better backfield mate is a start as well. But the playing time split actually worked out in favor of Charcandrick West last week, but Ware emerged as the goal line back, which isn't a surprise. Harder runner, bigger back, and tougher to bring down, perfect for the goal line situations. And that's really where he's going to shine. Chiefs are 10-point favorites over the Chargers, beat them by 30 just a few weeks ago. There's going to be plenty of time for the Chiefs to salt away a big lead. That's going to mean plenty of both West and Ware. And because Ware's the goal line back, I feel pretty good about him reaching the end zone this week, since the Chiefs are expected to trounce the Chargers and put up another big number. Get them in the red zone. I'm looking for Ware to reach pay dirt. I think West will pick up some yardage as well. But even as in a complementary role, I think Ware can push 50-plus yards rushing. You do that with a touchdown rush, you're looking at double-digit fantasy points, and that's plenty good at running back these days with the state of the position what it is. Next up is Anquan Boldin of the San Francisco 49ers, and I was ready to throw dirt on him a few weeks ago when Blaine Gabbert was named starting quarterback. I could not have foreseen Blaine Gabbert coming in and playing like a competent NFL quarterback. He looked terrible with the Jacksonville Jaguars, but has looked like a decent, at least a long-term backup at the worst, maybe a fringe starter here. He's played pretty well, and he's really started to use Anquan Boldin in the 3 games the two have played together. Gabbert's made 4 starts, but Boldin missed the first start before the bye with an injury. But they've played 3 games together since the bye. And Boldin's averaging over 10 targets per game, averaging over 70 yards receiving per game, and hauling in 6 receptions. So he's getting volume. If you're in a PPR league, that's over 13 points on just receptions and yardage. Hasn't found the end zone in those games, but does have a nice matchup against the Browns, so maybe he gets back in the end zone this week. Facing a team that's allowing 262.5 yards passing per game to quarterbacks and 25 receiving touchdowns. They rank 22nd defending #1 receivers according to Football Outsiders. And Bolden's coming off of a game in which he was targeted 13 times. The production wasn't there for the volume, but you got to like the volume. His targets have gone up every week that he and Gabbert have played together. And with them ironing things out, I expect Bolden to play like a safe wide receiver 3 or a strong flex option this week. Finally, at tight end, a guy that I highlighted in the Streamers and Waiver Wire article earlier in the week, Austin Seferian-Jenkins is a guy I'll be starting this weekend. If I have a need at tight end, maybe you're a Gronk owner and Gronk remains out. Maybe you're a Jimmy Graham owner who lost him for the year, or maybe you've just been riding the waiver wire for tight ends all year. Austin Seferian-Jenkins is a fringe tight end 1 this week. I'd say he's a top 10 scorer, I think, at the position. Coming off of a week in which he played just 21 offensive snaps, his first game action since week 2. I'd expect his snap count to go up a bit this week. Still, might be on a snaps restriction, which is probably going to scare some gamers off, but I'm going to say that that's more than offset by the matchup. He's facing a Saints team that's allowed the most fantasy points per game to tight ends, the only defense that's allowed more than 1,000 yards receiving to tight ends, and they've given up 10 touchdown passes in 12 games to tight ends. So tight ends are finding the end zone. They're piling up yardage. They're racking up receptions. There's no other defense that's even allowed 900 yards receiving to tight ends. So the Saints clearly have an issue stopping tight ends. Austin Seferian-Jenkins has been one of the favorite targets of Jameis Winston. One and two have played together. I mean, they've only played 3 games together, but even last week in his first game action in quite a while, he was targeted 6 times, which was top 3 on the team. Only a couple targets behind Mike Evans, so really getting work. And you got to like that for a guy of his size, his athleticism. He's going to be a matchup nightmare for the Saints. Got red zone ability, can find the end zone. So not just a touchdown dependent tight end, but certainly a big target in the red zone. So I really like Austin Seferian-Jenkins this week against the Saints. And as I said, I think he's a top 10 scorer at the position this week. So that's certainly good enough to make him a tight end 1 and make him a start option this week. And that's going to wrap things up for this week's podcast. Check out fantasyfootballcafe.com, where we've got articles, video podcasts, and an active fantasy football forum that's ready to help you win your fantasy matchups and hopefully your fantasy championship. Until next week, good luck.